Hi everyone, welcome to week 10 of the Laois Fit programme, which is funded by Healthy Ireland and Laois Sports Partnership. And today's workshop is going to focus on exercise prescription for the treatment and management of osteoporosis, osteopenia, and to promote good bone health. My name is Diane and I am a clinical exercise physiologist with True Fitness. So what you're looking at here is a representation of normal bone and also osteoporosis. Now, it's not obviously a real live image, it's just a depiction. But basically what you're looking at in the normal bone, you can see there that it's quite dense, it's thick, it's strong, and it's not fragile. Whereas if we look at osteoporosis, that would be characterized by low bone mass, thickness, strength, quality. And so what happens is it's quite fragile and it's quite prone to fracture or break on impact. Okay, so whether you get osteopenia or osteoporosis or not is dependent primarily on two things. So one, it depends on how much bone that you are able to acquire in youth. So your peak bone mass obtained in youth, and this is usually determined by the end of the second decade, okay, so the end of your 20s. So that's one thing. And the second thing then is the rate at which you lose bone as you age. And they have a big impact to play in whether you get one of these conditions. So within that, there are three factors that play a huge role, and they are hormones, exercise, and nutrition. So if we look at hormones, because our Sláinte Care project is working with 80 people between the ages of 50 and 80, many of whom are women, it's just important to say that menopause can bring about rapid bone loss because we lose estrogen. And studies have shown that a woman can lose up to 50% of her peak tubercular bone mass over her lifetime, and most of this is attributable to estrogen deficiency. So the menopause has a big impact, but there are things that we can do to help either slow down the rate of bone loss or in some cases actually improve bone, particularly if you haven't been doing exercise before, for example. Now, of course, nutrition is really, really important in bone. So, for example, calcium intake and being in a calorie deficit or not, all of these types of things can have a massive impact on bone. But the topic for discussion today is actually exercise. So the nutrition element is beyond the scope for what we will talk about today in the interest of time. But what I really want to focus on is actually mechanical strain. And by mechanical strain, I mean the impact of exercise on bone. So I just want to take this opportunity just to mention children. So in terms of how much bone you attain in youth, that's really, really dependent on particularly nutrition and mechanical strain. But if we just take mechanical strain, for example, so if children have low physical activity levels, so they're not running, jumping, skipping, hopping, and doing all of the things that they should be doing, this has a major impact on bone. So children who are quite sedentary, it would be really important that they get up and start to do these types of physical activity to help them lay down bone. But getting back to our adult population, so in terms of exercise and mechanical strain, mechanical stress imposed on bone increases bone mass. So it basically stimulates little cells within bone called osteoblasts and tells them to lay down new bone. And in terms of mechanical stress, I'm specifically talking about resistance training. So, for example, our Sláinte Care group have been doing body weight resistance training for the first half of the programme, which would be squats and lunges and press-ups and sit stand and these types of things. But now they have moved on to lifting household objects like, bottles of water, cans of food and so on. And some are actually progressing onto hand weights or dumbbells. So this type of mechanical strain is really important because as the muscle moves through the movement in the exercise and it becomes longer and shorter and it contracts over those ranges of motion, basically the muscle pulls on the bone that it's attached to and it sends a signal to ask it to basically lay down new bone. So it's really, really important to do that. And the other thing that's important to do is to take part in weight-bearing exercise. And what I mean by that is something whereby you are supporting your own weight on your joints and bones and tissues. So for example, walking. So walking would be a weight-bearing exercise. Cycling, on the other hand, wouldn't be a weight-bearing exercise because you sitting on the bike the bike is actually taking a lot of your weight, so it's reducing the loading on all of your joints and tissues and bones. So it is important to do weight bearing exercise to stimulate bone growth, bone quality, bone mass. In contrast, severe mechanical strain deficits results in decreased bone mass, and that is true in the case of physical inactivity. And just a side note, I would do a lot of work with bed rest studies with the European Space Agency, and basically what happens is you can see our recent group on the right-hand side there. So we take young, healthy, fit people and we put them into bed rest for up to 60 days. Now, there's many reasons why we do this. But one of the things that we look at is it's basically an accelerated model of aging. And even over 2 months, now that obviously is characterized by extreme physical inactivity, they lose significant amount of bone, of muscle mass, and their health deteriorates and so on. Obviously, ethically, then they go through intervention after that to help them recover from same. But the point is that there is a lot of research at the moment to show the detrimental impact of physical inactivity on bone, among other things. Okay, so in terms of the exercise recommendations for osteoporosis and osteopenia, we spent the first 4 mini workshops talking specifically about 4 different components of fitness, where we looked at how much you should do for health, what type, give you examples and so on. And the first one that we're going to look at is resistance training. So as I mentioned, resistance training like your squats, your lunges, lifting weights and so on is really, really important for stimulating bone growth. And the recommendations for osteoporosis and osteopenia would be a minimum of 2 to 3 days per week. And I have underlined 3 there because it's just so important for bone mass and bone quality that you should do it 3 days a week. So then we move on to balance training. And in our previous workshop, we talked about categorizing people in terms of low risk of falls, medium risk of falls, and high risk of falls. And if you have osteoporosis or osteopenia, you automatically move into the medium risk of falls. We don't want you to have a fall, particularly if you have advanced osteoporosis. So in terms of your recommendations for balance training, you automatically move to 3 or more days a week. And balance training can be done in as little as 10 minutes per day. And in our previous workshops, we have given videos, etc., of balance training. If anyone is interested, you can contact us for those. But balance training and falls prevention is very, very important in this group. In terms of flexibility, this is also extremely important. So because flexibility training is so important for this particular condition, I have a slide to talk about that coming up next. Okay, and in terms of aerobic exercise, this is also really, really important. Of course, it's very important for health. And the recommendations are 3 to 5 days per week, ideally 5 plus. But the guidelines really are, if you're short for time, that you really shouldn't exclude the other 3 components of fitness at the expense of aerobic exercise. Now, this is specifically for bone health. General health, of course, is really important to do your aerobic exercise. So the minimum requirement there would be 3 to 5 days per week. So flexibility training and range of motion exercises should be done almost every day of the week if you have osteoporosis. So in terms of range of motion, what I mean by that is if you've been attending classes with us, you'll know that in the warm-up, for example, we would start at the wrists and we would move them in one direction and then move them in the other direction and then up and down, and then we move on to elbows, shoulders, hips, knees, ankles and so on. So we go around the body moving all of the joints through their full range of motion, and that's really, really important and should be an integral part of training for people who have osteoporosis. And then moving into the flexibility or the stretching side of things. So the stretching exercises should mobilize all of the major muscle groups and joints. And if you are attending the Wednesday night sessions with us in Laois Fit, you will know that John does that. So he works all of the muscles of the body, and he works on dynamic types of stretches, which we'll talk about in a sec. And you certainly need to prioritize muscles that may be restricting certain joints, like shoulders or knees or wherever you're feeling restrictions. But really and truly, a full body stretching routine would be very beneficial for you. So we would recommend 5 to 10 repetitions of each stretch. And we perform dynamic stretching. So what that means is you do a stretch, whatever stretch, we'll say it's a hamstring stretch, and you hold it for 2 or 3 seconds, and then you relax back into your starting position, and that's one repetition. And then we do it again for 2 or 3 seconds and relax back to the starting position, and that's 2 repetitions. So there's a lot of movement, but it's slow movement in the stretching. And every time you perform another repetition, you're trying to stretch that little bit further if you can. And it's always stretching to the point of tension and not pain. So to help you with this, just to give you somewhere to start, John has created a full body stretching routine, and that's coming up in the presentation. And so what I'll do is, with this talk, I will also accompany it with a PDF of a stretching circuit that you can print, and also a link to a video where John takes you through the stretching circuit exercise by exercise until you have the whole body covered, and you can use that to help you in your training. This is the stretching circuit that John has created. On the left-hand side, you can see the exercise. So John lists the part of the body that the stretch actually stretches. So for example, calf, lower calf, hamstring, and so on. And beside that, he has the repetitions that you should perform. If you are a beginner, we would recommend 5 repetitions of each exercise. If you've been training with us for a number of weeks, and actually if you're in week 10 of Laois Fit, then you can absolutely go for 7 to 10 repetitions of the exercise, which is probably more in line with what John is doing at the moment in the Wednesday evening flexibility session. So, as I said, I will send you a PDF of this that you can print out if you want, and I'll also send you the link where John will take you through it exercise by exercise. So we've looked at the 4 types of training that you should do, but as with all clinical conditions, there are always special exercise considerations. And what I've done here is just pulled out some of the most common things that we need to consider. Obviously, when we're working with a person one-to-one, we're very, very specific because we're really focused in on how that person is affected by osteoporosis or osteopenia. But in general, we would avoid very explosive movements, so like jump squats or things like that, because the impact on bone raises significantly if you do explosive movements. So we would generally not do those. We wouldn't advise you to do those. You should and can do weight-bearing exercise like walking and stair climbing. It's part of daily life. We need to do it. And you should do it as tolerated. So if you're in pain with osteoporosis, you shouldn't be pushing through that. But if you're not, you should absolutely do it because it will help to maintain bone density and quality. So again, avoid high impact activities like jumping, running, and jogging. And it's not always the case for some people who have mild, maybe osteopenia, but again, because this is just a generic presentation, I will put that guideline in. If you have osteoporosis in your spine, there are a few guidelines that we absolutely need to pay attention to. So things like a traditional sit-up or abdominal crunch would not be a good idea. This just puts way too much pressure on those affected joints, and it's just not a good idea. Now, to be honest, it's not a good exercise anyway. We've moved away from that. It never was a good abdominal exercise, but absolutely contraindicated in this case. So excessive trunk flexion, which is basically bending forward, would not be a good idea if you have osteoporosis in your spine. And excessive trunk twisting, so from left to right, also contraindicated. But there are cases where if you're trying to move through mobility where you can do those movements, but just do them very slow and controlled. So it's about reading the guidelines and the contraindications, but interpreting for the person that's in front of you. So they're just kind of some of the guidelines to pay attention to. And you really don't want to load your spine with weight. So for example, if you were lifting heavy weights over your head in a shoulder press, you don't want to put that pressure on a spine that has osteoporosis. So we absolutely would not recommend that for you, even though resistance training in other ways is very, very good. So don't load the spine with weight. We really want to avoid situations with high falls potential. Now, I'm not sure if you would be normally trampolining every day of the week, but just in case, that's in there. So avoid trampolining. Slippery floors, wet floors, the winter months. So, rain, walking in wet shoes, snow, ice, muddy terrain from the rain in the winter, and so on. Anything where there's potential to fall, obviously you can't avoid all potential to fall, but it's just about being sensible to see, is there a better option? So just be mindful of that, because we want to avoid that. If you are severely limited by pain, you absolutely should have a consultation with your GP before engaging in exercise, or if it develops during exercise routines, because you may need some extra help with pain management, or you may need to readjust your exercise schedule. You absolutely need to be consistent with your training. There is a huge body of evidence to show the positive impact of this type of training on bone density and quality. So you absolutely need to train. Your flexibility training is very important, so almost daily. Your balance training and your strength training is also a priority. Your aerobic exercise is really, really important. It always is for your health, but it's just, don't sacrifice your other types of training for aerobic exercise, because in terms of bone mass, you really need to get in your strength training, and then in terms of falls prevention, you need to get in your balance training and so on. So just be really careful with that, and at a minimum try to do your 3 to 5 sessions a week of aerobic exercise. Okay, so if you're struggling to remember what those 4 types of exercise are in terms of examples and so on, go back through our previous 4 workshops and have a look at them. That's why we spend so much time on them in the earlier weeks, so that now we can move into how you adjust the combinations of these types of training to help a particular clinical condition. And just in terms of health homework, I've just created an amended 7-day training diary for people who have osteoporosis or osteopenia, and hopefully this will be helpful to you. Okay, so this is just a sample 7-day training diary. So you can see you have 7 boxes for Monday to Sunday, and you can write in the type of training that you do. So whether it's flexibility, aerobic, whatever it is. And you can write in how many minutes you do underneath that. And importantly, at the end, what I've done is just basically created what the recommendations are for osteoporosis and osteopenia. So you can see here, which is slightly different to the recommendations just for general health. Flexibility is up to 7 days a week, so you really, really need to get that in, and you can tick it off as you do it. Resistance training, the recommendation is 2 to 3 days per week, and again, you can tick that off as you do it. Aerobic exercise, 3 to 5, but ideally 5 plus. And the balance, it depends on the severity of your osteoporosis, and it also depends on age. So the balance recommendation can go from anywhere from 3 days per week to daily. But we're really only talking about 10 minutes a session, so it should be very, very doable and absolutely invaluable to you. And in terms of a rest day, you still want a rest day from training to let your body recover and repair from all of your training, but keep going with your flexibility work.